Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for that reception. It's completely deserved. My name is Jerome Weeks. I am the senior arts producer reporter for KERA's Art&Seek. And before we start our panel, I need to make some thank yous. I wanted to thank the Kimbell Art Museum for collaborating with us on this and providing this handsome facility. I want to thank TCU's School of Fine Arts as well, and Fort Worth Opera. Fort Worth Opera will be providing the entertainment afterwards. You may not realize that you could have a discussion and entertainment, a show afterwards. There will be a soprano, Megan Koch, singing up there, but there will also be beer, wine, food available, so we can just continue our conversation upstairs afterwards. And I'd like you to show your appreciation for the woman who's responsible for a lot of this. My boss, editor Ann Bothwell at Art&Seek. Tonight is her last official act before she goes on her honeymoon. Ann Bothwell. As many of you probably know, opera is simply the Italian plural for works. Opus, work, opera, works. And it seems to me a remarkably dull and non-descriptive word for something that is so rich and varied and complicated and glorious and grand. One imagines, in fact, a representative from the Duke of Mantua appearing to Claudio Monteverdi and asking him what he has on plan for the Duke's entertainment. And Monteverdi says, I'm going to retell Orpheus in the underworld. I will need an orchestra of 30, including 2 pipe organs. I will need 12 singers. I will need a chorus of demons, a chorus of nymphs, a chorus of shepherds. We'll have to have a set of the underworld, and we need the machinery that will fly Apollo in at the end to make everything right. And the representative says, good Lord, what do you call that thing? And he said, I'm giving the Duke the works. He could have called it the whole enchilada. But the fact is, what I'm trying to make is that the operas are so varied and so rich, one thinks that they would be adaptive enough to get past today's dilemmas and continue to survive and thrive. But art forms do die. Poets still write epic poems, but we don't sing them after dinner anymore. So, with that cheery thought, let's turn to opera. Tuomas Hiltunen was born and educated in Finland. He received his training at the Guildhall School in London before receiving a Fulbright scholarship to Columbia University. Most recently, he was the director of management and administration at the Barenboim Said Foundation, which was established by Daniel Barenboim and Edward Said. And of course, he is now the general director of Fort Worth Opera. Tuomas? Sharon Goodspeed-Keaton is the Director of Educational Outreach at Fort Worth Opera. Sharon. David Gately has directed more than 300 productions for 60 companies around the world, including 20 just for the Fort Worth Opera. Since 2015, he has been the director of the Opera Studio at TCU. David? And Paulina Magdaleno is the director of community outreach and special events with Fort Worth Opera. Paulina. Now, your eagle eyes may have noticed a final chair there that's still empty. We believe Jonathan Eaton has been delayed by weather from coming here from Denton. He is the director of the Opera Studies program at UNT, and we hope he will join us later. But coincidentally enough, I was going to begin with Jonathan anyway, because amongst his many accolades, the highest surely was the fact that he was interviewed by me. We have a weekly series called the Artist Spotlight, in which we profile North Texas creative artists. and I profiled him as the new director at UNT's opera program. And I wanted to begin with a kind of baseline as to what opera is facing now and why it would seem to be in trouble. And so this is an outtake that I didn't use for that story. This is an outtake from Jonathan from that interview. Jonathan was very thoughtful. We seem to have some technical difficulties at the moment. Well, I will read what he said as backup. Not nearly as interesting because he has a lovely British accent. There's a business and an artistic model of grand opera which I believe is ultimately going to be unsustainable, other than very few areas of excellence. Nothing against grand opera, I love it. But the model is you have a very large theater, 3,000 seats or more, and 90% of the operas we perform were not written for 3,000 seat theaters. And if you're in a theater that size, you've got to hire singers with big voices, and they're expensive. The stages are big, and you've got to put lots of scenery on those stages with big effects and a big orchestra and a huge chorus. Pretty soon you get this process of elephantiasis. Everything has to get bigger in order to pay its way. And in order to pay its way, it then has to increase yet again. It starts to leave behind the human experience of sitting in an audience and seeing other human beings on stage and getting caught up in their drama. That's what draws me to opera. Otherwise, we're in danger of becoming something of a museum piece. And I thought I'd begin with Jonathan's remarks and turn to David and Thomas and ask, is that a fair assessment of where opera stands?
You want? It's an assessment, and it's a true assessment. It describes a certain kind of opera company and experience. I think that Tomasz and I were actually talking just before the event about how we're constantly looking for new models in this experience we call opera. We're trying to get audiences closer to the action. We're performing in smaller spaces. I mean, there's always going to be the Metropolitan Opera and the Chicago Lyric and the San Francisco Opera, and they're going to perform in their large houses, and that's their mission, and that's what they do. But everybody is looking for alternative spaces. Tomasz can talk about that too, because I think they're doing one of their pieces this year in an alternate space. And actually, in my experience with the Fort Worth Opera, we always did as well. We would suit some smaller pieces to smaller spaces. The last thing I did was a voir dire, and it was done in a black box, and it was an audience of only about, I think, 150 people. And it's a piece that was suited to that kind of experience, and you wouldn't want to see that in a large opera house, and so you're drawn in a whole crowd. I see my dean sitting out there in the audience tonight, and she was instrumental, Anne Helmrich, who's sitting out in the audience tonight, in helping us just do a world premiere just last weekend of a piece that we did. Now, this is quite an unusual thing because our co-producers were the Soldiers Chorus of the United States Army Field Band. And we went together with them and some other opera companies, including the Siegel Music Colony, Seattle Opera, San Diego Opera, and commissioned a piece that was about a soldier's experience in Iraq. And we premiered that at TCU in a situation where we had about 400 seats in the house. Once again, an intimate experience, full orchestra. It was only 11 pieces in the orchestra, but full orchestra, a smaller cast, and it was a way to make the experience smaller and more intimate for the audience. I don't want to talk too much.
This art form that was created 420 years ago wanted to reimagine Greek theater and added music to it. This art form now is becoming more and more global and international. There are, like you mentioned, lots of co-productions, international co-productions. At the same time, the art form can become more regional. There are regional differences. In this community, there are more people who speak Spanish as their mother tongue. That is invaluable piece of information for us. And often you mentioned that we are doing one piece in an alternative space. Yes, we are doing brief encounters. It is a collection of 3 short operas by Hegi, Illich, and Adamo. And what happened was, and I'm going to keep this very short. I love long form. We went to do a small concert at Botanic Garden in December, and we took our singers there. It was a holiday concert. And we discovered that the auditorium there was fantastic. The acoustics were just amazing. Our singers loved that space, and that architect knew exactly what he was doing. You look up, you see the undulating ceiling. There are no panels on the wall. Yes, when you look at the seats, they are all brand new. It's been here for 32 years. It's a sleeping beauty. So our singers after the concert said that, when can we do something here again? And so we decided to take our brief encounters to that space. It is a fantastic space. Singers can use a very quiet voice, and it stays very crisp. But then they can also use their bigger voice, and it doesn't break. So I hope that you will come to discover these short operas and also to experience that space.
I think what we're saying here is that Jonathan's assessment was about grand opera and not about all of opera, it would seem, that opera is varied enough. But what about the lovers of grand opera? And also those operas that seem to break the rules and go for scale. Angels of America is a kind of event opera. Moby Dick, Jake Heggie again, but still, it was kind of an event opera. Angels of America broke the rules for theater too. No one does a 2-part, 12-hour play, but they did. It's been a success all over the world. So what about that? Is it simply a matter that they can be adapted to smaller scale?
I think you can do it in a couple of ways. Okay, so if a piece isn't under copyright anymore, you can do reduced orchestrations, and you can rethink, and you can make it happen in a smaller space and use your creativity. If it's still under copyright, you don't have that much freedom to mess around with things. And yes, there always will be grand operas, but opera companies will do some of each. They'll do that big grand Aida, which calls for huge forces, and then they'll do a piece in a black box or somewhere else, just to give a wide variety of experiences, so that the people who want grand opera still get that, and yet we have to make this art form alive, and we have to keep it growing, or it will die. We have to explore new ways in which, and new pieces and new composers. I'll say, sometimes you have to shut me up because I talk a lot.
You're going.
When I was getting started in opera many years ago, it was almost impossible for an American composer to get a piece produced. That was because they were expensive, and they could never get another company to do them after they were done once. So it was a huge investment for a company. And so there were 3 or 4. There were Argento, Carlyle Floyd, Thomas Passettieri. There were a few people who could get an opera produced. Now there are dozens of composers who can get their works produced by opera companies all over, because almost every opera company in the United States wants to include one new American work in some fashion in their season. Audiences are clamoring for it because they've seen about as many bohèmes as they can take, and as many butterflies and as many La Traviatas. I mean, they're amazing works. We love them. But you can't keep reprogramming them every 3 or 4 years and expect your opera company and your audience to grow. Fort Worth Opera has this amazing mission that Tomas was talking about reaching out to the Spanish-speaking community. I mean, I think it's like almost a 3-year program or a 4-year program that you're following.
Now it is a permanent program.
A permanent program to continue doing operas in that language, because that is what our audience here in Fort Worth is. It doesn't mean that they won't do Don Pasquale or some big major work too, so that you can still keep the standard operas going, but extending it, reaching out, making it grow, making it a different model. And as Tomas said, it's different in every city. Every city has their own little idiosyncrasies, and it's important that the opera companies find out what those are in each and every city.
Paulina, you are the Director of Community Outreach. How do you bring a Latino audience to an opera? Even an opera like Maria de Buenos Aires, which is Argentinian. How do you do that?
Well, first of all, we're very dramatic, so and intense. So to me, it's kind of like opera is like a telenovela in a bigger scale. You know, like if you're not mine, you're not from anyone, so I'm gonna kill you. But I love you. It's fine. So we started the initiative, which is not an initiative anymore, not just the opera. Last year with a mariachi opera. We're doing the Maria de Buenos Aires this year is a tango opera. It's in Spanish, of course. So it's a way, you have to start somewhere, right? So the mariachi opera proved that there was an audience, that they liked it. Of course, the story was about, you know, it had immigration, the immigration element, borders, leaving your family in another country. But at the end of the day, we kind of like, this appeals to a lot of people, not just the Hispanic community. So I'm very proud that I'm part of this initiative and that I'm part of this company. We're here to stay. You know, we're not just doing it because, oh, it's a trend. You know, now we want to reach Hispanics. It's a natural thing. So, you know, we will keep doing it. And to me, I consider myself Exhibit A. I am learning every day about opera. So part of my job is kind of like share the enthusiasm and the joy that I feel every single day about discovering new things about opera, and also discovering that, you know, I have heard that song in a pasta commercial, you know, or in 1982. Again, here we go with the telenovelas. La Traviata, I was doing research the other day, and it was like, that's 1982, Bodas de Odio. Are you kidding me? So, you know, and of course, besides the Hispanic initiative or outreach, we are trying to do other things to introduce people to opera and kind of sharing this, you know, breaking the stereotype that is boring or that you have to dress up, you know. And just one more thing. One of the things that we did this January, and it was super fun, we took opera to a yoga studio, and we call it Ompera. So we played a couple of songs there, you know, so it was Downward Facing Dog, and it was Habanera from Carmen. Good. So that's what we do, and like I said at the beginning, we're here to stay.
I thought you might want to mention Gabby as part of your connection to the Hispanic community.
Okay, so Gaby Natale is our super Latina. She has a TV show that is nominated to an Emmy for the 6th time this year. She's from Argentina, and I used to work with her a couple of years ago. So when John de los Santos, Maria de Buenos Aires director, asked me in a meeting, you know, I need like a local talent, a Latina, kind of like bubbly, intense for this non-singing role called El Duende. I immediately thought about her. You know, there was no other person in my mind that could do this. So she's now rehearsing. She's part of the Maria cast. She's local. She's Latina, and you know, it's kind of like part of what we can also do here to promote opera. You know, including the local talent, and just have fun.
One of the ironies here is that she is a TV personality and a journalist and interviewer, and so she's taking a non-singing role in which she plays a demon, when she's made up a
very sexy demon.
Yes.
I was going to say that John de los Santos, who is directing Maria de Buenos Aires, he is from San Antonio, but he is a graduate of TCU.
Yeah.
When I spoke to you, David, about the Falling and the Rising, the opera that you just mentioned, you were talking about topicality, that these kinds of issues, it's pity Jonathan isn't here because he's done an eco-opera, an opera about Rachel Carson, and he's done a gospel opera. Why do these kinds of issues? Why address them? Is an opera really the appropriate form?
It's interesting because the style of the opera was kind of a mixture of, in fact, a local reviewer, who shall remain nameless, said, not really an opera, not really a musical. And that's actually kind of what we were going for, because it was this hybrid kind of experience where you thought you were kind of listening to a musical, and then it became this much, more serious music than that. And it kind of got people excited. It was a way to get people excited about going to an opera with a language that they could a musical language that they could actually understand. We have a kind of a twofold reason that we did The Falling and the Rising. First of all, there's a huge a commitment by TCU to reach out into the community, to do pieces that, in the whole School of Music, and I'd say in the rest of the Fine Arts department as well, to do things that involve the community. This very actively involved the veterans community in TCU. We got our ROTC on TCU involved, and actually we had a whole group of soldiers from the Soldiers Chorus on the TCU campus interacting with the students as we were creating this opera. So there's this huge outreach, and also we have a huge mission at TCU to do new works. We were the major commissioners on this piece. And Dr. Gibson, who's the director of the School of Music, is constantly looking to commission new works in every one of the departments in the music, in the School of Music. So we have a mission to reach out and involve a new community. I think this particular opera really fit that bill on a number of levels.
Thomas?
That word outreach is a very interesting one, and we can use the same words but mean totally different things. For Fort Worth Opera, outreach means that we are going to the community where there is culture. We are not just taking our performers to an area that doesn't have culture. We are really here to celebrate what we have here and rediscover. It is the question whether opera will survive. Most of the people here in Fort Worth, in a city of almost 900,000 people, don't know that Fort Worth has an opera company. So we have lots of work to do, and we need everyone's help. Just what can people do? I think that one of the most important things would be to tell your friends that Fort Worth has an opera company. What else could you do? Bring a friend to opera.
Sharon, what did you do to tell people?
I start primarily with young people as part of my job and my passion as coordinator of the educational outreach program. So not only are we dealing with a group of people who don't know that there's an opera company, a lot of times they're unfamiliar with the art form as a whole. And so my job is to do outreach in these communities, which takes opera on a smaller scale to these schools and to these community events, and hopefully convert people. I guess convert would mean taking them away from what they love. So maybe that's not, maybe I don't want to convert them. Maybe we want to just open their eyes to something new. Culturally, young people tend to lean towards pop culture, whatever is popular, whatever they see in front of them on television and video games, and that's not opera. So part of my job and my mission is to teach them that our version, especially, of opera is not your grandparents' opera. This is not just you have to put on a tuxedo, as Paulina said, and you have to go sit and watch a classical opera and sit with your hands crossed. And don't clap and don't say anything, but you can enjoy it. You can have fun. You can see it in venues that are more relaxed and that you don't have to wear tuxedos if you don't own one, or trying to make it accessible to people, all people.
And Sharon, just real quick, tell how many performances you guys did in your outreach this year.
Oh, holy cow. So, back in August, when I took over this position, I had the amazing task of booking performances for the TCU Fort Worth Opera. Hattie Mae Leslie, Young Apprentice Artist is a very long title. And we did more than 200 performances for the fall semester, September to December, and then the short spring semester, January to March. So in 4 months, they did more than 200 performances. Wow.
How many Title I schools?
More than 52% of those were Title I schools, and more than just a little over 31,000 students total were served. So. Mm-hmm.
You told me about a particular program that I wasn't aware that Fort Worth Opera was doing.
Yes.
If you could talk about that. I hadn't realized it had been going on for this number of years.
Yes, we have a wonderful program called Opera Shots, and Opera Shots is one of those amazing, unconventional programs where we partner with a local bar or pub, and we take opera to that venue for an evening. And we perform everything from musical theater to art song to opera arias. And sometimes it is our regular opera followers that come into a bar or pub that they've never been to, but oftentimes we see patrons of that bar or of that club walk in, and totally unbeknownst to them, there's going to be an opera performance.
It's like the strangest karaoke night.
It is, and it's quite interesting to watch sometimes, because they come in and we see this total conversion of them sitting down, expecting their normal beer and country western and maybe a football game playing, and all of a sudden they hear this odd noise coming from the back corner, and they're taken aback at first, but then you start to see them start to mellow and pay attention, and all of a sudden they turn around in their bar stool and they're actively listening, and then they make their way over to our table and go, "What is this?" And then we have an opportunity to say, "Score, we got another one." So.
David spoke about new works, the need for to create new works, and about the commitment of TCU to commission new works. Is Fort Worth Opera going to be doing that?
Yes, we have our Frontier series. We invite composers to submit excerpts from their pieces, and then we have a jury that will select a certain number that will be then presented here in Fort Worth. Last year we had a jury that had 9 male jury members and 4 female jury members. 2/3 male, 1/3 female jury. And it selected pieces that were written by men only. So this year we decided to try something different. We found 4 amazing female jury members and 2 male jury members. And
what were the results?
We are presenting 6 pieces, and 2 of those are by women. Yes. Next year, we will be presenting a traditional grand opera on the main stage, which is directed by one of the best opera directors here in this country and worldwide, Francesca Zambello. It's the first time we are bringing a female director's work to Bass Hall. In 2020, we will be presenting The Last Dream of Frida and Diego, which is being composed by Gabriela Elena Frank. It is the first time we are presenting a work by a female composer on the main stage. Not just because of the gender, but because they're the best composers and best directors. We don't want to have token people. No one wants to be a token.
David, you spoke about, you mentioned that the Falling and the Rising was actually a collaboration amongst a number of companies. And yet that was still a chamber opera. It was a fairly small production. How difficult is it to create a collaboration? One moment, ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Eaton.
Talk about making a grand entrance. Those opera people distrust them.
Thank you for joining us.
So sorry to be joining you so late.
That's all right.
We can thank some good Texan weather and phantom tornadoes. Sounds a bit like opera already, doesn't it? And hail, the like of which I've never seen.
I've been doing a poor job filling in for you, I'm afraid. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the operas that you've done at the Pittsburgh Festival Opera, in which you tackled different sorts of subjects, different ways, things that opera usually doesn't put on stage.
Certainly. I wear two operatic hats at the moment. I'm the new director of opera at UNT, which is a terrific institution, so glad to be there. And for many years I've been general director and now artistic director only of Pittsburgh Festival Opera. A bit like Fort Worth Opera, we are the slightly smaller operatic institution in a city that has another larger opera right next door. And we became a summer festival 6 years ago, emulating to some degree the direction that Fort Worth Opera took. We did that better to serve our communities so that the two opera companies weren't competing at the same time of year, and there were opera offerings all through the year and in the summer also. And we also did it because we like to be a little different. And one of the areas we wish to be different in is in this whole idea of how do you regenerate the medium? How do you appeal to new, younger, and wider audiences? And how do you stop opera becoming a museum art form? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with museums. We love museums. We're sitting in a very splendid one. But opera takes place in the present. It's music. And we wanted to respond to the feeling that opera was becoming perhaps a little distant and removed from our audiences. So we created a series that we call Music That Matters. And there's a lot of background to this, and I won't go on about it a lot, but we decided to commission new works, one every 2 years, on topics that were arguably of very great importance to people in our community in Pittsburgh, in America today. The first of these was what we like to think of as the world's first eco-opera. And there's a bit of common sense in this too, because there are large constituencies of people who are very concerned about our environment. And it so happens that Rachel Carson, the scientist who wrote Silent Spring, was a Pittsburgher. And we availed ourselves of that happy circumstance and created a piece inspired by Rachel Carson, written by Gilda Lyons, called A New Kind of Fallout, set in the 60s initially and then ending in today. Our next work was a work that addressed racial tension and particularly violence in our streets in Pittsburgh. We've had a couple of shootings of young black men by white policemen in our city, and we thought we would take that bull by the horns. But rather than commissioning a composer who may have great academic credentials or be a force to be reckoned with in the world of serious classical music today, we thought, who are we trying to reach, who are we trying to talk to? Why go to Chicago for a celebrated young African-American composer? Let's find somebody local that has real connection to our community. And there's a Baptist church that I have spent many hours in, with many young children on my lap. The services last 3 hours. The children are universally affectionate. and any unadorned lap they will adorn. And in this church, there's, I think it's the 3rd champion gospel choir of America. Interestingly, the Minister of Music does not have a formal college or conservatory education. He's got a good musical background and runs a fantastic gospel choir. We commissioned him to do 2 mini pop-up short operas in unusual spaces. And we thought, well, we'll give the guy a big work and we'll set him up with a more formally trained assistant to help convert the musical ideas into performable scores. And we did that piece last summer. It met with very significant interest. One lady walked up to me after a show and said, "How much money would it take to televise this and put it on television?" And I sort of gulped happily and said rather more than I thought it would, but those days I was just the general director, and these days I don't have to deal in the money stuff so much. And this lady gave us a large check, and I'm thrilled to say that this work will be broadcast on public television in the Pennsylvania region on July the 1st. It's called A Gathering of Sons. And it was an all-black team that created it and directed it. I think it was an offering that for our community was very good. Is it a critical piece for the renewal of the medium across the nation or in other countries? I don't know, but I don't know if composers who have that goal in mind as they approach their work are realistically going to get there. It's a whole series of happenstances that convert an experiment into a national art treasure loved by all. So we were happy with the result, and we're thrilled that it's going on television, and I'm sure I've spoken enough now.
Sounds great.
Seeing as we've been discussing the future of opera, it's convenient that we have 2 leading educators because you will be training the future of opera. And given these kinds of changes and these kinds of innovations or adaptations, how do you train young composers, singers, directors for an opera world that doesn't yet exist? David?
At TCU, even from the very beginning, I have emphasized that we need to do all sorts of different styles of opera. I do a huge opera scenes program every fall, which sort of introduces everybody to the children, the students that we have in opera studio that year. And we do everything from really, really early music to things that haven't been even performed publicly before. My first piece that I chose to do when I took over the opera program was Nico Mulhi's Dark Sisters, which is an amazing piece about the fundamentalist Mormon cult that is it's usually found in northern Arizona, southern Utah. It's an amazing opera which studies all kinds of things about those issues and speaks in a language that was incredibly challenging to my students. And then we just did a world premiere. I mean, I want them to be exposed to be able to do everything, because when they get out into the real world, the first jobs they're going to get are not going to be anymore for big opera companies. It's going to be for the American Opera Center in New York, or places that hire young singers to come in and do brand new works. And they need to be able to sing, to converse in any musical language that is thrown in front of them. So we try to prepare them for that while they're still students. And the interesting thing about it is they don't even really know the difference, because for them, Marriage of Figaro is just as new as Dark Sisters, So they're just learning stuff. And they don't know that they're being prepared to go out and have experience in a wide variety of things.
Jonathan?
I think we need to train our young artists in deference to the fact that they need to make a living also in a good bit of the standard repertoire. And it's really hard being an opera singer in terms of all that you have to learn. They have to be able to sing in different languages, they have to understand what the languages mean, that's critical. They've got to have the notes, the tubes, the pipes, and they have to be able to act too. So as I come into this program, I discover that like many colleges and conservatories, there's a terrific focus on singing. We have wonderful singing teachers. But there isn't a sequence of movement and acting classes that leads you up to being a stage animal and performing on stage. And I'm working to address that. With regard to preparing them for a newer, exciting opera world out there, I think they've got to be able to do a bit of crossover in very many areas. So they have to be able to entertain. None of us should knock entertainment. I think actually it's the first requirement is that you entertain your audience. If you can then teach them about the meaning of life, that's something wonderful in addition. But the big crime, first of all, is to bore people. So they have to be able to entertain. They have to realize that opera is a theatrical art form and they have to have theatrical skills. And many of them come into our conservatories with absolutely no awareness that it's about a lot more than just singing. That's one big part of it. Another part of the crossover then is how can we train them to appreciate and be excited by the new? And we're going to start commissioning some new works at UNT, hopefully in collaboration with some other fine conservatories. And wow, doesn't the Republic of Texas have a lot of really good conservatories and colleges of music? Really excellent. So, hey David, maybe we should collaborate and commission something together. What do you think?
I already have something in mind, actually.
Oh, good. So this is going to be an interesting evening. So we want them to do new work. There's an American composer, Tom Cipulo, and we're doing the complete works of Tom Cipulo. He says it's only 3.5 hours because he's written 5 chamber operas. We think he's one of the sort of up-and-coming American significant opera composers. So our students have to be able to do in a year Marriage of Figaro, a reduced version of Faust. The reduced version is interesting too. Alcina, the complete works of Tom Cipulo, and Street Scene, the Kurt Weill sort of Broadway opera crossover. So that's how we're trying to do it. I'll let you know in 20 years whether we're succeeding.
I think Glory Denied, the Tom Cipulo's opera, was done by Fort Worth Opera.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
David, you mentioned something about the nature of The Falling and the Rising, and that it was consciously aimed at some place what Jonathan called crossover between opera and musical theater. What is that place? What is the distinction?
That's a whole long discussion about what's opera and what's musical theater. You know, you can talk about it vocally. This piece demanded a lot that singers be able to sing in a sort of Broadway style, a lot of middle voice, a lot of conversation, without necessarily belting for the sopranos, but still, you know, a lot of a kind of a lighter vein of music. And yet, then suddenly it would take off with huge soaring lines, a lot of, you know, high stuff for the soprano, real legit stuff for all of the men who sang. So it was just this mix, but it was tuneful enough that an audience could think that they were almost, you know, listening to a musical comedy as well. Yet the music itself was very challenging to sing, orchestrally very challenging. So that's what the genre was kind of mixed. And when it came out, you know, it's not really a musical, not really an opera, my answer to that was, yeah. So it is what it is. It's a piece of music, and it speaks in its own language, and you have to be prepared in all the ways that Jonathan was speaking about in order to perform it. You have to be able to sing, act, you know, all of that stuff, and entertain. And yet maybe it was its own little hybrid genre. I'm not sure.
Jonathan, you're dealing with a musical theater. You're foraging through Rodgers and Hammerstein's back catalog.
I am, and there's some terrific stuff there. And I'm the proud and happy dad of an American late teenager who did musical theatre in high school. And I'm here to tell you that it's alive and kicking, and some of it's really very, very good. In a way, that is the indigenous music drama of America, and so it should be. We should have, say I, because I'm a professor now, so I'm allowed to profess. So I would profess that we need pyramids of cultural activities that extend from the grassroots very broadly around wide communities, and then they work their way up through various organizations until you get to the Met at the top, let us say. And musical theatre is a part of that. The word in Germany for opera is rarely Oper, it's usually Musiktheater, music theatre. And lots of crazy little companies in other countries use the word music theatre and step away perhaps from opera, but ultimately it's much the same thing. It's telling stories through music and drama. And if you look at a piece like Les Mis, it's an opera all the way through, insofar as it's sung all the way through, not a word is spoken. So sometimes the distinctions are moot, but the talking to people in a language they can understand about things that matter to them is not moot. That's important. The language doesn't have to be a language they're always familiar with, but it does have to be about something that matters, and it does have to be comprehensible. You can, at first hearing, enter into a world, perhaps like your Nico Muli piece, if the composer and the librettist are truthful or have integrity or in clever. Sometimes these words are hard pressed to describe some of the responses that opera really feeds off, but truth and integrity and beauty are part of it, and that's not just a preserve of a grand style of opera. Indeed, I would go further and say that the bigger the operatic activity, the more in some levels it removes itself from the day-to-day audiences. We're trained in a world of drama that's very intimate, screens mostly, and there's a huge advantage in something that's up close and personal if we want to affect people and touch them and talk to them. And the bigger your theatre space, the further removed a bulk of your audience are from the human beings on stage. And unless you're careful, opera can become a business that's about distant singers on far-flung stages singing in foreign languages. That would describe a great deal of operatic activity in some of our bigger companies and bigger cities. But if you don't have that wider grassroots base to the pyramid, you're not feeding people into that system where the further up you go, the more rarefied the atmosphere. Did I answer your question?
More than answer.
More than enough.
Yes, go
If I
ahead.
may, Nico Muli was a young student at Columbia University. He was also at the same time studying at Juilliard, and we did a production of Midsummer Night's Dream, and I liked the way he composed. And so when he was still at Columbia and I had graduated, I asked him to create music for a production of The Magnificent Cuckold. He created fantastic music, and he got to work with actors, got to see how the stage works. And here we are talking about opportunity. It is very important for Fort Worth Opera to provide opportunities to young composers. And another thing that is very important for me is image. For new audiences, younger audiences, it is very important that we present an image that they can identify with. Even before the singers sing the first note, what the audiences see, that has a huge impact. And it needs to be something that, in my opinion, audiences need to be able to relate to.
This is the point in the program in which I normally ask for questions from the audience, but I thought I'd experiment with something different tonight. If you heard my radio promos for this evening, the promos opened with a question. What would it take for you to go see your first opera? And I assume that there are some people here tonight who haven't seen a live opera. Maybe only saw them on television or on the Met Live programs. I want you to think seriously, what would it take for you to see your first opera? Change in price, assurance that it's not in German. And those of you who have seen operas, what did it take for you to choose an opera? And I don't mean your mother. I mean, what did you, when you had that chance and decided to put your money down, what led you to say, Dead Man Walking sounds like a fine date night? So I'm curious. I'm sure the opera professionals here would appreciate the survey data. So does anyone have recollections? If you don't, I'm going to threaten you with continuing to talk. Excuse me? Going with a friend?
The invitation.
Yes.
I remember in New York City, this is several years ago, they had New York City Opera, which were super affordable for young kids who wanted to enjoy the atmosphere, who couldn't afford the Met Opera for sure. And that was a really easy way to be introduced into something. And these are up-and-coming singers who are about to make it big, they're practicing their craft. It wasn't perfect, they're missing notes, but it was awesome because you're growing with them through the process. And I think the one thing I didn't understand there was that local university here will offer that opportunity for young people to go and see the singers and kind of grow with them.
Yes.
I would like to hopefully attend an opera that I would be able to experience maybe in a different language, but also be able to understand in English, subtitles or some other way, to actually get some meaning out of what they're saying, not just the emotional.
Maria de Buenos Aires is going to be done in Spanish with English supertitles.
Yeah, we always have super titles in our operas. And
I think
even-
all of us do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe that's something that people don't know. So thank you for.
We actually do
yeah.
all our operas in English in Pittsburgh. There are only 2 companies left in the nation, I think, us and Opera Theatre of St. Louis,
St. Louis, yeah.
yeah, that do that. So we're doing a Bohème, for instance, in English, but we're making it an Andy Warhol-style Bohème because Andy was a Pittsburgher. And I've always believed and will firmly believe that comedy in particular is always better in the language of the audience, and that it's one of our strange opera snobberies that pretends otherwise. Not all works may be better in the language of the audience. It's true that there are a couple of Italian bel canto works that tend to sound better in Italian. And maybe some of those are the plots we don't want to understand anyway,
Yeah, really.
like Trovatore.
Exactly. But Jonathan, that gets back to another point you made
Yeah.
earlier about the size of the theater. So if you're in a 3,000-seat house doing opera in English, sometimes it's almost beside the point because you can't understand it. It's so hard to have diction that reaches the last person in the house in that language. So that goes back to smaller houses.
Right.
You do it in the language, and then people can have this. It's like going to see a play or going to see something that they would totally understand. It's that size of that house again that becomes a real tricky thing about doing. Sorry to go on, but when I was getting started, I worked for the Houston Grand Opera, and we had 2 series. We had the international series and the American series. And the American series was doing the same opera, but in English with younger singers. And so you do Aida, and you do Aida with the Italian cast, and then Aida with the English-speaking cast. The chorus, interestingly, had to learn it in both languages and perform it on alternating nights in a different language. But I'm telling you, when you would sit there and you would be lucky if you got 40% of what was being said on stage,
Right.
even though they were singing in English, just because it's so hard to project the text in gigantic houses like that.
Mind you, I think that's a failing of we educators or teachers in opera too, because certainly the voice teachers, while they may be committed to language, their job is really to teach technique.
Exactly.
They may well think. And unless you're in a college or a conservatory where this notion of clarity of diction is hammered into you, you can get away with blue murder as a singer. And pink murder too, for that.
Anyone else about, yes, sir.
I saw my first opera when I was 10, but unfortunately it was the Fledermaus. It was awesome music, and I think they probably spoke in English and some in German.
Oh, yeah.
I think. But had it been what I would consider a modern opera, that's atonal and hard to listen to, I probably wouldn't have gone to another one. But it was great music, and it was very accessible, and just encouraged me to do more.
I'd also think that you'd be very hard put to find atonal opera now. There's a whole new language that composers are composing in today, which is much more accessible. I mean, if you went to some of those 12-tone operas or during the 70s and 80s, it was torture. Right. It was torture going to the theater, but people that people are writing in. Yeah, exactly.
It was necessary to hear sometimes something atonal and get pushed and come back to what you're talking about.
Absolutely, and I think didn't Herman Gutierrez, who is our conductor at TCU, didn't he just do a big 12-tone work? You know, because it was a composer from his homeland that he really wanted to feature. So yes, we got a whole big taste of it again fairly recently. But there's all kinds of new languages, so you shouldn't be afraid to go to a modern opera because you think it's going to be atonal and weird and ugly, because people are writing in amazingly beautiful musical languages now, which is very accessible.
Thanks to America, I would say. This.
Yes, George.
Ballet has its introductory ballet piece, the Nutcracker.
Right.
When will opera or can opera develop a piece that is so universally beloved that it's and so accessible to, say, kids, people who are, 5-year-old children? Can there be such a piece that is, in fact, a kind of universal introduction to the idea of opera? Or do we need to go back to Bernstein and the concert for children idea?
Well, I think there are starter operas.
Amal and the Night Visitors.
Like Hansel and Gretel is a great opera to get children to go, and it's a story that they can totally relate to. Musically, it's incredibly complex, so that it can appeal also to music lovers. We've got our bohemes and our traviatas, which everybody. I mean, I always go back to Moonstruck when Cher went to her first opera and was crying her eyes out in the end because she said, "I knew she was sick, but I didn't know she was going to die." So I think that there are a few that I certainly recommend as starter operas when people come up to me and say, "What should I go see?"
This isn't for children, but for me, Stephen Sondheim was a gateway drug.
Totally.
That Little Night Music was the one that I realized that it was more than just the usual musical.
Yep.
And so I started exploring from there. So that's not a bad idea, actually, finding something that's just simply musical theater that's accessible.
Absolutely.
Because when I first encountered musical theater, I thought it was just strange and boring, mostly because it was a bad college production. But,
And I think it also becomes, again, a little bit the responsibility of larger opera companies to produce smaller pop-up operas, not only for the community, but for the schools. Because like he said, he saw that when he was 10 years old. Most 10-year-olds don't get taken to an actual bass hall or an actual performance space. So I think that it becomes the responsibility of the opera companies to create smaller, more accessible works to take out into the community and promote those smaller pieces. I think that would help a great bit.
Yes, sir, you had your hand raised?
For younger folks, Julie Taymor's Magic Flute Group.
I've not seen that, and I like Julie Taymor's work.
Magic Flute would be a wonderful introduction. You do hit the language issue. Magic Flute can subvert that by having the dialogue in English. And I know lots of young people who find going to their first opera in a foreign language is automatically a barrier. With the Nutcracker, it's not a barrier. There is no language to get in the way. You might say Carmen is a great first opera, but then you'd still hit for young people who've never had a connection, or older people. You said a first opera doesn't have to be for children, that the language might become an issue. And that's one of the challenges we inherit with the repertoire that we inherit, which is another reason why we need to do new works that can draw people in. There's also a fragmenting, though, of our culture generally, isn't there? People get locked more and more in one on a screen or one-on-one or smaller groups of connection for their entertainment as well. And I think opera has to take cognizance of that. The days when you can automatically assume that a couple of thousand people will come into a big theatre, I suspect are going, and that if opera is to look to the future, opera does need to produce smaller scale works of greater variety, and maybe take them out to the people rather than expect the people coming to them all the time.
As I said, one of the great advantages of this space is we can continue this conversation upstairs and with wine and beer. So if we thank our panel.
And opera. Yes.
Thank you very much.